Hey, this is Sarah from the One Life podcast, and you're about to hear part one of a two-part episode from a conversation we had with Braxton Hunter. There's so much great content, we just felt like it needed a little bit more space to breathe, and so you'll be hearing that over the next 2 weeks. If you're watching this episode, there is a point just a few minutes in where our battery died on our camera, so the video drops out, but it does come back after a couple minutes, so just continue to keep watching, and we will be back there on screen. So here's episode 56. Hello, welcome to episode 56 of the One Life podcast. We talk about things from One Life Church, but just ultimately things we think can relate to you and your one and only life. My name is Sarah Inman. I'm one of your co-hosts, and we are in a series right now called Centered, and we're going through and exploring worldviews. And there's a couple things that are happening every week, and at the beginning of the podcast for the next few weeks, in the past few episodes, Brett's been going through and kind of doing a little bit of a recap and giving us a little bit of some of his wisdom. So, Brett Nicholson.
Some of my wisdom. There you go.
You're saving some of it for Sundays, but some of it goes on the podcast. So.
I never knew you thought of it that way, though, Sarah. Yeah. That's what's really encouraging.
And today on the podcast, we are joined by Braxton Hunter, which will intro Braxton officially here. Brett will
That's
do
right.
that
Here in just a moment, because what we said was during the series Centered, we want to, first of all, build a Christ-centered worldview, and second of all, we want to build confidence in a Christ-centered worldview, and finally, the ability to have conversations about your Christ-centered worldview. And so on the podcast, that's the main place where we want to talk about confidence and especially conversations, and that's why Braxton's here. But just to recap what we've said so far, we've been coming out of 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 and 16, where it says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have." So have your reasons ready. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience. So it gives the manner in which you're supposed to be doing these things, but also, and we even said that William Lane Craig is probably the foremost apologist in the world right now. He said every Christian, he thinks, ought to have 5 reasons kind of written down literally in their pocket where they could at least reference and have thought it through. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. How do you develop those reasons, and how do you use them, and that kind of thing? And that's why I wanted to have Braxton here. Braxton is an apologist by trade, and apologist, for those of you who may not know, is someone who gives a defense for the faith. And he's done this in a number of different settings. He's had debates. We had him on the podcast before after he debated a gentleman by the name of Matt Dillahunty, who has a very large following on YouTube as an atheist, and he is very outspoken against Christianity and the whole message. Well, Braxton went and did a public debate with Matt Dillahunty, and so we talked about that whole experience and what that was like. And what I appreciate about Braxton at this point is that there's a lot of that kind of thing going on YouTube and social media, and he's thrown himself into the ring, and because that's where a lot of this kind of discussion is going on. We did say we want to learn how to have conversations, and that does absolutely include our social media behavior, because everybody pretty much is known for not behaving terribly well on social media. So we are going to talk about that as well, because that's the world that Braxton lives in, as well as his other ministry that he does, where he speaks in front of live audiences. He is also the president of Trinity. I keep mispronouncing words. I think I'm intimidated because Braxton, among other things, he's not only the president of Trinity Seminary, where I am now attending school, he's now one of my professors. So there's a lot of intimidation factor going on here, and so he's got a lot of insight on those things. So we're just going to jump right into it. And so welcome, Braxton. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me here, Brett. And no, that goes the other way. You're my pastor, and to sit here at the desk with you and talk about these weighty issues is intimidating to me. If anyone's intimidated, it's me.
Oh, is that right? Okay, oh, good. And then Sarah is intimidating us both, I think. And so that's kind of how that goes.
I have a whole website of apologetics terms ready to go, just in case.
Which I think is hilarious.
I feel like I'm not
literally
contributing.
Has a glossary right next to it. And
That's
we'll
great.
remember that some of you are very familiar with apologetics, some of you maybe not at all. But I encourage you to, because really what we're talking about is these things do come up in social media circles. They come up in break rooms at work, family reunions, your own kids. You can get questions. You can try to witness to your faith sometime. And we are going to be talking to Braxton specifically about dealing with atheism. That's not always the case with people who are unbelievers, but I do have questions around that. So the first one I wanted to ask you, Braxton, was, having done this for a while in a lot of different settings and dealing with people, what do you wish all Christians knew about atheists specifically? What have you learned in interactions like this?
Well, first of all, I've learned that there are a lot of different types of atheists. In fact, I have a video on my YouTube channel that outlines the different types of atheist YouTubers that are out there. And I think that there are broadly four. But those are atheist internet personalities. I think the most of the people that you're going to encounter who are skeptics or unbelievers or whatever are going to be people that you work with or who are in your family or just friends that you have, and those are normal people. Atheists are not sucking the blood of children. These are normal people.
That's a good thing.
We're glad to have discovered that in our research. But they're normal people. They help little old ladies across the street. They pay their taxes. These are normal, good people. And so in conversations with them, most of them are not like the famous atheist personalities that you're familiar with, not just on YouTube, but who write books and things like that. People like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett. These are normal people. And if you can share with them some good reasons to believe, many of them are open to that. Many of them are open to being convinced. And so I think that there is a very clear difference between those internet atheists that you'll meet and the people that you might meet in daily life. And those people you meet in daily life, I think, are much more open. So I guess the thing that I would say is I wish every Christian would realize is you don't have to be scared to have conversations with these people. You can have meaningful worldview discussions with the skeptics that are in your life, and you don't need to be afraid to do that, so long as you're willing to go and find the answers to questions they may have that you might not know about.
And one thing I'm curious about with that is when it comes to atheists, it seems like, because I was just having an interaction, this is very relevant because I just got an email today from a good friend of mine who had someone in their family that has gone out of the church and has declared themselves to be an atheist. So is it your experience that many would label themselves as former believers back there somewhere, or many of them is a lot of church background or not much, or?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the difficulties when you're trying to reach out to people who identify as atheists or skeptics or whatever is that they think they know all the answers that you're going to give. And some of them do have I don't want to take anything away from that. Some of them do have a knowledge of apologetics. Some of them do have a knowledge of a lot of the biblical material. And so that's a very real thing. A lot of them don't, or the knowledge that they have is very surface level. But because they come from often fundamentalist, Christian backgrounds, it's hard to convince them that there can be a meaningful discussion that might include evidences or information that they haven't thought of before, because they feel like I already investigated that and have kind of closed the door on it. But that's where the other side of this is important, which is meaningful relationships, caring about people, and developing relationships over time where you can open those doors.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Now, what are there arguments or debating points that you have found typically seem to be compelling to the average person that you've interacted with? Are there certain things? Because we're trying to get everybody to kind of build their William Lane Craig suggested evidences, like build your 5 evidences. And what are some of the things that you found that have kind of made people at least be a little more open, or thought, I never heard that, or whatever else?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's kind of a complex one. Many people will run to a passage like Romans chapter 1, verse 20, which say the invisible things of God, his eternal power and divine nature, are clearly seen through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. In other words, Paul was talking about idolaters. And he was saying that if you're an idolater and you're not recognizing one maker God, then you don't have an excuse for that, because you should be able to look at the created world and see evidence of one maker God. And so people will take a passage like that, many Christians, and say, well, then it can't really be the fact that anyone is truly deep down an atheist if the Bible is true. But here's the thing. Someone who's not a believer isn't necessarily being disingenuous, because even though the truth may be out there such that they're without excuse, there are so many cultural suggestions coming at us. However, taking all of that into consideration and that biblical data, people begin to doubt or walk away from the Christian faith for a number of reasons. One of those reasons might be doubt that does have a moral motivation. So a guy wants to sleep with his girlfriend, and he knows that his Christianity is not consistent with that. And so there's a moral motivation for him to reject. That can be true. It's not true of everybody, I don't think, but that can be true. Another thing can be emotional doubt. How can I know? There's so many religions in the world, and what if mine is wrong? And what if these atheists are right? And there could be an emotional doubt there. So really what we're talking about here is specific to the intellectual doubt that can happen. With some of those other forms of doubt, I think, the truth of the gospel, just presenting the gospel message and loving that person and showing them why there's a community here for them, or whatever it is that hits those more heart issues, can probably be more compelling than the evidential apologetic type stuff. But with the intellectual doubt, I've found that for most people, a good design argument is really compelling. The complexity of the world, the universe seems to give evidence of the fine-tuning of the universe for life. Even some of your famous atheists, the late Christopher Hitchens, on one occasion, he was one of the world's leading atheist voices. He wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Bold, provocative title, right?
He's just got to draw a line there. You got to hand it to him for that.
Yeah, and he, in an interview or in a movie that's called Collision, admitted that the one argument that kind of gets him thinking sometimes is the design argument. I think because what Paul says in Romans 1:20 is so true. You can look at the creation around you, and it seems, at least, like there's good reason to believe there's a designer behind it. So that's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I hear you saying is, and we've talked about this before, and it's kind of a theme, if we're learning conversations, and we know it's almost too obvious to even repeat, but on the other hand, it seems like we stumble a little bit when it comes to this. Is always the relationship first, in effect, is getting to know people. We've said, listen first, get to know someone's story. You don't know what their hangups are. It may be they wanted to sleep with their girlfriend. It may be that their mom passed away when they were a kid and they just always had that emotional struggle. Why would a God let that happen? I had a young girl tell me that she used to come to church when she was a kid and she prayed that her dad would stop being addicted to drugs. And he never did, and she just let it pass. And it was really, really hard to answer that. I can just see this little girl, just begging God to get my dad off drugs, and it never happened. And so it carried over into her adulthood, and that's why she dismissed it. So it wasn't about coming up with some fancy argument. It was more like, okay, that's the struggle that you may have.
Yeah, that's why I highlight that emotional, personal, interpersonal side of things, because there are people like that. But it's not the design argument's not my favorite argument. But I think, and I shared this recently at another church, I think that we need to be able to show that two things are true for a mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis called it a mere Christian, message. And that is that you need to be able to show that God exists, or give good reasons to believe that God exists. And you need to be able to give some good reason to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Because those two things are central to the truth of the Christian message. It's kind of hard for Christianity to be true if God doesn't exist, right? And it's hard
I'll go with that. Seems logical.
Yeah, that's right. And so you need God. And then you also, the historical centerpiece of the Christian faith is the resurrection of Jesus. So a Christian needs to be able to say some things about the resurrection. But where this connects back to what you were just saying is, there you had a situation of pain and hurt in a person's life, and they felt like God wasn't there for them. So I tell churches a good reason to believe in God, a good case for the resurrection, and something to say to what is known in the realm of philosophy and philosophy of religion as the problem of evil. Something to say to that question of where is God in the midst of our pain and suffering.
Yeah. So have those kind of in your pocket if you're going to build your five.
I think those three definitely need to be in your five.
Okay. Yeah. That's a great way to do it. So when coming back to the design argument, I agree they're compelling as well, but how could I, if I'm just average guy and I'm not going to go to a class, or I'm not going to maybe even read a book on this, or is there a way to frame a design argument that you could give me that it would go on a Post-it note?
Yeah, I think possible? So. Whenever the design, and again, the design argument's not my favorite, but it is one that
I'm going to ask you what your favorite is.
Okay, good. Okay. I was that's right. in the professional biz. Right. That was me prompting you for a second.
Okay, go there. Okay.
But the design argument is is very compelling to people. And I think a lot of people think, oh my gosh, I have to know all this science and I have to know about evolution and what am I going to say about that and the age of the earth and all these complex things that Christians are probably are unprepared to talk about and unqualified to talk about very much at any depth. But you don't have to do any of that. There is incredible evidence of design in the physical universe, even outside of biological life, where evolution qua evolution isn't really as much of a factor. So a good argument that someone like you mentioned, William Lane Craig, this is Craig's design argument, and it goes like this. The fine-tuning of the universe is due either to physical necessity, chance, or intelligent design. It is not, and then premise 2 is it is not due to physical necessity or chance, therefore it is due to intelligent design. And what he means by physical necessity is there simply is no other way it could have gone. It had to go this way. And the physics is not behind that. It could have gone any number of ways, the beginning of the universe. Chance, could it be chance? All you have to do if you're a layperson is just memorize a couple of good analogies to help with this. Hugh Ross has a great one. And I think it's in his book, The Creator and the Cosmos, but he says it like this. He says, just one of the parameters that the balance has to be right in order for life to be able to form is the balance between electrons and protons. And he says the chances that we would have the right balance is 1 in 10 to the 37th power, which is a chance of 1 in 10 with 37 zeros behind it, that big of a number, right? And he says, so to give you a picture of how this works, cover the entire North American continent in dimes from here to the moon. Okay, that's a lot of dimes.
From here to the moon?
From here to the moon.
Okay. That's
and then he says, now cover 1 million other continents, the same size as North America, with dimes to that same height. Then paint 1 dime red and mix it in to those piles of dimes. Blindfold a friend and ask him to select 1 dime at random. The chances that he'll get the red dime is 1 in 10 to the 37th power. And this is only one of the parameters that is so delicately balanced to allow life to form. In other words, it's effectually zero. It's not zero, but it's effectually zero. Well, just little analogies like that or illustrations can be so powerful in showing that to someone. So it's not physical necessity. It's not chance. So it's intelligent design. Intelligent design is the best explanation. To put it much more simply, God is the best explanation for the order and design we see in the universe.
Yeah. Well, you can, and is that the Hugh Ross illustration? Is that what you said it was in Creator and the Cosmos?
I think it's in his book, The Creator and the Cosmos. Okay. I also have it in a video and give the footnotes on my YouTube channel. Not that I'm here to endorse youtube.com/Braxton Hunter. That's not why I'm here at all.
That'll right. also be in the show notes. So there you go.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's right. That's the show notes.
I had the thought though, as you were saying that, I think so often, even my own life growing up, like when we were trying to come up with, you're in a conversation with someone who either doesn't believe or believes something different or, really coming at you, usually your first response is not that type of information. It's usually
right.
a personal thing that's happened to you or something you're trying to explain. And that's easier to talk about for most people, or at least that they understand, but that's not the same personal thing that's happened for someone else. So having something that's more, that connects to anyone and everyone makes
yeah,
sense.
it's often, Sarah, that the intellectual reasons are smokescreens. Now, I don't want that to sound condescending to any skeptic or atheist that's listening right now, because it's not the case for all of them. And so if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. But in many cases, it's a smokescreen. There's some heart issue. There's something that happened to them. Mm-hmm. There's some hurt that they don't feel like God was there for them. And again, that's not everyone, but in those cases, what I would say is the personal testimony, the love to my mind is the greatest apologetic. The first part of 1 Peter 3:15 that you mentioned, to revere the Lord is in your heart always. Those are the main things. The reasons that these more technical answers need to be there is in order to pull away that smokescreen if it goes that far. And I think that those are good. And also I should say, because the argument that I just kind of laid out can be a complicated argument. And you as an individual Christian don't have to have a PhD in these things, but you may not be, I think I said this the last time I was there on the show, you may not be an answer giver yet, like hopefully I am, but you can be an answer finder for people by being aware of where the resources are to share with them these answers.
Yeah, and it was said, but it needs to be repeated, because that is the position that we find ourselves in oftentimes. Yeah. And okay, so you said a good reason to have why you believe in God. And I agree. It's kind of one of those things that you always want to have. And we were coached. I was coached in evangelism years ago, and we don't do this as much anymore, but always have a 2-minute version of your story available. Don't have a 20-minute version of your story, just a 2-minute that you can rattle off pretty quick, ready, because he said, be prepared so the day may come and your turn's up. But the other thing is taking it beyond the personal thing. It's nice to be able to talk about, and why else would you believe that? Well, the Hugh analogy or whatever else, it makes it also, it takes it where it's not just me. It's where both you and I can look together at something, and what do you think about, and then discuss that. It makes it more objective. Now, with the resurrection thing, because we did encourage people to have to focus in on the resurrection, their personal authenticity walk, but also the resurrection of Jesus. But the more I thought about that, I thought, well, how could you boil something like that down to make it deliverable in a break room just to somebody? How would I argue for the resurrection just in a simple way that could at least start the conversation? And there's a lot of different evidences around it, but even walking into that with somebody might be a little bit difficult. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So Gary Habermas, who is one of the top 3 scholars on the resurrection in the world right now. There's 3, N.T. Wright, Gary Habermas, and Mike Licona. Gary Habermas came up with the term for his process that is aimed at that very thing, and it's called a minimal facts approach. And what the minimal facts approach, as you know, Brett, says is, okay, look, if we're going to show that the resurrection really happened, and you're talking to someone like we're talking right now, or you might be talking over Thanksgiving, when you're watching the game or whatever, you need to have several facts that you can use to show that the resurrection happened. You don't have to defend everything that's in the Gospels. You don't have to show that all the elements that are there are all true. What you need are a few facts that you can use to make the case for the resurrection, that the resurrection is the best hypothesis for. And so for lay people and people that are not initiated in this kind of thing or doing this professionally in a debate or something, what you can do is you can say, listen, I'm going to use only facts that the vast majority of New Testament scholars and historians agree about. And that includes atheists, agnostics, Hindu scholars, and perhaps some others. And so you're using only those facts that the scholars all agree about, right? And we're talking about in the 90-something percentile. So most people will say, well, yeah, I mean, if the relevant scholars in the field agree on these things, that these are historical events that actually occurred, then yeah, we could use that. Okay, well, if you can do that, then I give a few. I give 4 or 5. Let's see. So first, I would give reason. I would tell them that the scholars universally agree that Jesus thought of himself as God's special agent to bring about the kingdom on earth. That is accepted universally by Christian and non-Christian scholars. So Jesus thought of himself that way. Now that's pretty important, because that means that during Jesus' life, it was as if he was carrying around a sign saying, just watch my life and see what happens. So this makes us say, okay, well, let's pay attention and see if anything interesting happens here, right? Secondly, Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. That is believed by every teaching historian at an accredited university on the planet right now, that Jesus thought of himself, that Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. One of the great reasons for that is that the greatest historian of ancient Rome, Cornelius Tacitus, confirms that fact. So that's interesting. And Josephus talks about it, a Jewish scholar, non-Christian. So, but you don't have to get into Tacitus and Josephus. So look, scholars agree Jesus thought of himself this way, and he died by Roman crucifixion. The third thing is that the majority of scholars believe that the earliest disciples of Jesus had experiences that at least they interpreted as appearances of the risen Christ. Now that is pretty powerful stuff. I mean, think about that. Non-Christian scholars admitting that these guys had experiences that at least they thought were appearances of the risen Christ. Paula Fredrickson, who's a liberal Jewish scholar, she says, as a historian, I don't know what they saw, but as a historian, I know they must have seen something. Right. Because they changed the way they lived, the way they acted, the way they worshiped. It's amazing. And then lastly, these disciples, the earliest disciples of Jesus, were willing to die for the claim that they had seen the risen Christ. Now, what many people will say at this point is they'll say, yeah, but people die for stuff that's not true all the time. Well, here's the thing. Liars, I'm not the first to say it, liars make poor martyrs. People usually don't die for things they know are not true. Well, what about terrorists who die for things that aren't true? Well, here's the thing. Some terrorists do die for things that aren't true, but they're not in a position to know for sure whether it's true or not. They may be believing something that's a lie, but they don't know for sure that it's a lie, and they believe it. But the earliest Christians, if it weren't true, if it were a lie, they were the ones who made up the lie. And people just don't die for those kind of lies. So anyway, I think that develops a really good case for the resurrection. So to run over them quickly, Jesus thought of himself as God's special agent to bring about the kingdom. He died by Roman crucifixion. The disciples had experiences that they interpreted as appearances, and they were so committed to that claim that they were willing to die for it. There's a lot more we could say, but you could use those simple facts and make it relevant by saying that the scholars agree on these things. And you could lay out a case just using what I've just said, I think.
There you go. You delivered.
That's great.
That is great. And that's what we mean by, always be able to give a reason for the hope that you have. Mm-hmm. And again, you have your story and you have your authentic life. You have one little observation about God and the resurrection itself. And if you have that prepared and it's there, you can pull those things out. And as you get in the conversation, if you see yourself getting in over your head, I love that whole thing of, being able to be an answer finder, say, hey, that's a great question. I like to say it this way. We coach our leaders here. If you don't know, say so. Never fake it. Just if you don't know something, just say, hey, I have the first clue. I'll find out.
Through our podcast, we just updated some of our T-shirts and coffee cups and stuff like that. I'm not trying to hawk that here, but we actually have a T-shirt.
You hawk the other thing. Go ahead.
Maybe.
Where can I get these T-shirts?
But we have a T-shirt that says Answer Finder, and it actually says, I might not know, but I can find out.
Is that
because
right?
we want people to take that and use that. We want people to let others know. I might not have all the answers, but I'm willing to find out for you, and we can continue that conversation.
Yeah. And most people don't know there's an entire field, especially unbelievers, there's an entire field called apologetics where people have written more books than you can imagine on the very questions that you're asking. And that's very, very important.
That was part 1 of our 2-part episode with Braxton Hunter. Such great content. We'd love to hear from you guys. You can email us at podcast@onelifechurch.org. You can leave a comment on YouTube or on Apple Podcast or anywhere you're listening to this podcast. We'd love for you guys to share that out. Let more people hear this great content and have an opportunity to continue that conversation even further. Our music was produced by Micah Robertson and Ben Brock. My name's Sarah, and I produced this episode.